Good morning, ma'am, and good morning, classmates. So, my topic for today is risk treatment. Risk treatment is the process of selecting and implementing of measures to modify risk. Risk treatment measures can include avoiding, optimizing, transferring, or retaining risk. The measures or security measurements can be selected out of sets of measurements that are used in the information security management system or ISMS of the organization. At this level, security measurements are verbal descriptions of various security functions that are implemented technically. For example, software or hardware components, or organizationally. For example, establish procedures. Risk treatment also refers to the options and choices available to handle a specific risk. Risk can be controlled internally through risk avoidance slash prevention or risk reduction or minimization. Next is identification of options. Having identified and evaluated the risk, the next step involves the, infor- the, i- the identification of alternative appropriate actions for managing this risk, the evaluation and assessment of the results or impact, and the specification and the implementation of treatment plan. Management or treatment options for risk expected to have positive outcome include starting or continuing an activity like create or maintain the positive outcome. So that's risk treatment. And walang parang na-reduce yung risk ng security mo, which is which is magme-maintain ang security mo to a positive outcome. Modifying the likelihood of the risk to increase possible beneficial outcomes. Or modifying the likelihood of the risk to increase possible beneficial outcomes. So that, so yun, the more you modify, the more, the more na ma, the more you modify, the more na malalaman na the more you modify, the more you know how to risk will probably outcome to your system. Trying to manipulate possible consequences to increase the expected gains. Sharing the risk with other parties that may contribute by providing additional resources which could increase the likelihood of the opportunity or the expected gains and retaining the residual risk. So next, identification of management options for risks having the negative outcomes look similar to those for risks with positive ones, although their interpretation and implications are completely different. Such options or alternatives might be to avoid risk by deciding to stop, postpone, cancel, divert, or continue with an activity that may be the cause for that risk. So, kung alam mo na sa sarili mo na risky yung gagawin mo, so uh, so the best way to avoid risk is to stop, postpone, cancel. Or kung malakas naman ang loob mo, kung malakas naman ang loob mo, you can continue the activity. To modify the likelihood of the risk, trying to reduce or eliminate the likelihood of the negative outcomes. So kung nagtitake ka ng risk, don't focus on the negative outcomes, just stay on the positive outcomes. So try modifying the consequences in a way that will reduce losses. So next, share the risk with other parties facing the same risk. Insurance arrangements and organization structures such as partnerships and joint ventures can be used to spread responsibility and liability. Of course, one should always keep in mind that if a risk is shared in whole or in part, the organization is acquiring a new risk, like the risk that the organization to which in which the initial risk has been transferred may not manage the risk effectively, and to retain the risk or its residual risk. In general, the cost of managing a risk needs to be compared with the benefits obtained or expected. During this process of cost-benefit judgments, the risk management context established in the first process, like this definition of scope framework, should be taken into consideration. It is important to consider all direct and indirect costs and benefits, whether tangible or intangible, and measured in financial or other terms. More than one option can be considered and adopted, either separately or in combination. An example, for example, is the effective use of support contracts and specific risk treatments followed by appropriate insurance and other means of risk financing. Development of action plan. Treatment plans are necessary in order to describe how the chosen options will be implemented. The treatment plans should be comprehensive and should provide all necessary information about proposed actions, priorities or time plans, resource requirements, roles, and responsibilities of all parties involved in the proposed actions, performance measures and reporting and monitoring requirements. Action plans should be in line with the values and perceptions of all types of stakeholders. The better plans are communicated to the various stakeholders, the easier it will be to obtain the approval of the proposed plans and the commitment to their implementation. So let's proceed to risk monitoring. Risk, risk monitoring is the process which tracks and evaluates the levels of risk in an organization, as well as the monitoring the risk itself. The discipline tracks and evaluates the effectiveness of risk management strategies. The findings the findings which are produced by risk monitoring processes can be used to help to create new strategies and update older strategies which may have proved to be ineffective. So risk monitoring is the effect yun yung pinaka-effective way na pinaka-effective way na ma-detect mo ang risk compared to risk treatment. So makakatulong ang risk monitoring to na ma-improve at makagawa ng panibagong strategies at ma-update ang mga lumang strategies sa pagdetect ng mga risk security. What is risk monitoring like? For example, so the example ng monitoring is this. Risk monitoring is like the monitoring a star athlete's performance. First, the coach will watch the star athlete and make a note on their main strengths and weaknesses. Yung nga, parang tinagalog ko na rin. So, for example, is yung nga, si coach ng basketball, obserbahan yung kanilang star athlete kung ano yung mga, kung saan siya malakas or saan siya mahina. For example, malakas siya sa for example, ang strength niya is shooter siya. Pero weakness is hindi niya kayong mag-rebound or something. This day will also make a note of everything which has a positive or negative result on the athlete. Yung nga, katulad ng strength and weaknesses, kailangan mo rin malaman ang positive or negative ng isang star athlete. This will help them to understand what works and what doesn't. The coach can improve the athlete's performance by encouraging the things that are shown to help, stopping the things that don't. So, ayun nga ayun nga, si coach gagawin ng lahat para maangat ang performance ni star athlete at ma-improve ang kanyang performances at tinagano ko na yun at at itigil na dapat ang hindi dapat gawin ngayon katulad ng bisyo, pagdodroga. What is the purpose of risk monitoring? The purpose of risk monitoring is to keep track of the risk that occur and the effectiveness of the responses which are implemented by an organization. Monitoring can help to ascertain whether proper policies were followed, whether new risks can now be identified, or whether previous assumptions to do with these risks are still valid. Monitoring is vital because risk is not static. What are the different types of risk monitoring? Number one is voluntary. These risk monitoring strategies are not required by law, but are carried out by companies to help them to learn from events which have occurred in the past. So, si voluntary, ay nga, example na lang is companies na tutulungan yung government para maiangat at mabawas-bawasan ng risk at ng mabawas-bawasan ng risk ng companies upang hindi maitulad ito upang hindi maitulad ang mga risk na nagawa before. Obligatory. These risk monitoring strategies are required by law for some organizations to ensure that proper risk monitoring and management methods are used. Obligatory. These risk monitoring strategies are required by law for some organizations to ensure that proper risk monitoring management methods are used. Reassessment. Secondary or tertiary assessments of risk and risk management strategies, and continual monitoring which is always ongoing. How does monitoring impact on managing organizational risk? Risk monitoring is important because it helps to highlight whether strategies are effective or not. Risk monitoring can impact upon the management of organizational risk because it can lead to the identification of new risk. Strategies may also need to be changed or updated depending on the findings of risk monitoring strategies. Integrated management systems. Integrated management systems have the potential to yield significant business benefits by looking at multiple aspects of an organization's operations holistically. An integrated management system, or IMS, makes it easier to identify problems, zero in on areas that need improvement, and implement the changes that can have a positive effect on the company's bottom line. So, an integrated management system is also a single system designed to manage multiple aspects of an organization's operations in line with multiple standards, such as those for quality, environmental, and health and safety management. Four key strategies for how to integrate management systems. Haban ito. Use materiality as a guiding principle. Materiality is a fundamental accounting principle where the information that could influence an economic decision should be disclosed. This principle acknowledges that in the context of financial decisions, some information is more important than other information. The goal the goal with materiality is to improve the usefulness of corporate disclosures for making decisions. When considering all fa- facets of an organization's operations, the sheer scope and complexity of a business can be overwhelming. Using mental materiality will help ensure that your IMS project can garner support from executive management, the board, and other stakeholders. Number two is identify common business processes or elements across relevant management systems. Finding common elements or processes in your internal management systems requires a diligent assessment of corporate policies and procedures. This will entail a top-down review of formally document policies and procedures as well as informal operating practices. A cross-functional team with stakeholders from each functional team will be required. The stakeholders must have a deep understanding of corporate policy and procedure for their respective functions. In many organizations, these stakeholders may be the formal business process owners, such as a manager responsible for process safety or simply the employee accountable for specific performance objectives. Uh, Number three is assess the status of current management systems. There are two techniques that may use for this stage. One is to relevance management system standards such as those created by the international organizations for standardization or ISO. Even if your organization does not intend to formally implement ISO standards and obtain certification, they could still guide an assessment. For companies that already have established management systems, revisiting the ISO can be helpful as well. In 2015, ISO standards were updated to address overlap and inconsistencies across different management system standards in response to feedback from organization received about the difficulty of using ISO for IMS deployment. A key advantage is that third-party independent bodies publish standards provide an objective view that can be used to help overcome internal stakeholders resistance to change or bias. And the last part is I identify differences in semantics between management systems. The words we use to, to describe management systems semantics play a key role in how systems are perceived. If we don't define our terms, we risk operating on false assumptions and creating inefficiency. That's all. Thank you for.